If nobody talks about you, then you are nobody. Then you are nobody. Remember, child.
All is One Reflections. I am Priestess Oshun Funke. And tonight we are here for, I'm just toe up, y'all. D'Angelo has joined the ancestors. And so tonight I am here to do a metaphysical and spiritual autopsy report on this amazing artist. This was a tough one, y'all. So many moments in my young adult life, college life, are punctuated by D'Angelo songs. And it's just really sad that he, at such a young age and just so unexpectedly, that he is no longer with us. But hopefully, this reading tonight will celebrate him as much as it mourns him, because he really did leave his mark in the short time that he was here. So we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about the day he was born and what that predicted about how his life would be. And we're going to talk about the day that he left us and how those 2 days speak to his legacy and what that means for us who are fans and admirers of D'Angelo. So let's just dive right in. D'Angelo was born Michael Eugene Archer. And so his name was Michael Eugene Archer. And y'all, I have so much information. I compiled this over the past couple of days, and I was just wanting to get it to you in a timely fashion. I did not actually go back and cut it down. So I apologize if it looks like I'm reading, because I am. But I want to pull out the most relevant parts, okay? So D'Angelo was born Michael Eugene Archer, and he was born on February 11th, 1974 in Richmond, Virginia. He grew up in a Pentecostal household. His father and his grandfather were both preachers. I can relate to that. I'm sure many of you can as well. His earliest musical experiences took place in the church. That is not an uncommon thing amongst African Americans. He began playing the piano around age 3, and he was often noted to be absorbed in worship. So even as a small child, he would get overcome with spirit. He would be very excited to praise and to sing and to worship. It is said that he was a big fan of call and response. He enjoyed the prophecy that he experienced in church, and that he had a very unique spiritual voice. So not just his voice, that we came to know and love with him as an artist, but he had a unique spiritual approach to music. So the Pentecostal framework shaped his understanding of God, as well as his relationship to other people. And most importantly, I think for us as his fans, his relationship to music and how he would serve through his music. So his ministry was through his music. These are all very common themes, in our communities. In his adolescence, he formed bands called Three of a Kind, and he had another band called Michael Archer and Precise. Okay. He performed locally, and during this time, he was kind of trying to figure out who he was as a musician, again, how he would interact with others in service through music. And ultimately, he decided to do it on his own. which is how we came to know him as the artist known as D'Angelo when he was signed to EMI Records in 1993. The debut of his album, Brown Sugar, was in 1995, and it landed him at the forefront of the neo soul genre, where he weaved funk and jazz and even gospel together to create music that was sensual and richly textured. In the year 2000, he dropped the album called Voodoo. So, you know, we loving that over here at Arisha Hoodoo. His album in 2000 was called Voodoo. And in this album, he deepened his craft. He was more mature as an artist. He had many things figured out. It was decidedly more intentional and obviously more him than outside influences that may have come from just the musical climate of the day or even record label execs. His year 2000 album Voodoo was very much an intentional product, and it was obvious. Um, it had a much looser structure than the album did before. The rhythms were more expansive. There was a lot of ancestral energy that I could perceive, and I'm sure many of you could too. And there was almost like a ritual resonance. In this album, he definitely struck out on his own. Now, going back to the song Untitled, which we all probably know as How Does It Feel? He actually made his mark as a sex symbol. If y'all remember that video, D'Angelo stood topless down to below his waist, and we saw those muscles muscling, and it looked like he had baby oil rubbed into his beautiful brown skin. And we will never forget that imagery of D'Angelo. Put a pin in that. We'll come back to it because that imagery and the fame that it brought him would later be a source of trouble for D'Angelo. After a long silence, he came out with another album in 2014, and this album was called The Black Messiah. This album was urgent, it was spiritual, and it was socially alive. We didn't hear much from D'Angelo after his 2014 album. We didn't even know that he was ill. Many people, even close friends, reported not being aware of his illness. And at his death, he was said to have been working on a fourth project. He passed on October 14th, 2025, from a short battle with pancreatic cancer. And his passing was private and it was quiet. And friends and family say that it was dignified. So we give thanks and praises for that. So during the album Voodoo and later phases, he wore multiple strands of beads. Y'all saw the album, I'm sorry, you saw the picture at the beginning. Omo, could you put that picture back? Thank you. So you see pictures of him wearing a leke. So yes, D'Angelo was a practitioner of ATR. Thank you. So he wore alekes, and these are sacred objects to practitioners of the Orisha traditions. And there are many different Orisha traditions. And I'm not going to guess. I've read different things about his practice, but because I don't know for sure, I will just say that he was a practitioner. He was a practitioner of Orisha worship. Okay. And from the picture, I surmise that the aleke that he is wearing are Elegua, Yemeya, Oshun, Shango, and Obatala. Okay. However, I cannot confirm that. And there is no absolute evidence that speaks about what he practiced and who was in his spiritual court. But we know what we see when we see it as practitioners. Okay. But he was a person who was engaged in African traditional religions. So let's get into his birthday. Let's talk about who he was spiritually. So again, D'Angelo was born on February 11th, 1974, which makes him an Aquarius. Okay. And so not only was he an Aquarius, but he is part of the latter degrees of Aquarius. And I'll get into that more later. But his identity as an Aquarius is coded by that archetype. One of being a prophet and an innovator and also an outsider. Because, as I said, he's positioned in the latter degrees of Aquarius, this means that he carried with him urgency, a pressure to lead the charge, a charge that maybe he was only aware of. He took his personal mission very seriously. And the weight of being a visionary left him very affected. You might have experienced him as a person who was moody or deep in thought, very deeply focused on a purpose. Okay. His moon sign is Libra, which gave him an emotional core that sought balance, relational harmony, and aesthetic equilibrium. The moon in Libra drives meditation, relational sensitivity, a longing for fairness. And it also means that he looked for, or he held profound discomfort when balance was off. Okay, he was very uncomfortable when things didn't make sense and when things seemed unfair, not only in his own life, but when he observed these things in the world. Again, going back to that Aquarian aspect that would have made him appear moody to some, or people may have experienced him as a person who was always brooding, always thinking about something, taking issue with things. Libra only compounded that because he sought fairness. Things needed to make sense. They needed to be right and exact according to him. So let's talk about some key aspects of his chart. Now, I'm going to talk to you about a word that you may not know the meaning of. And so I'm going to give it to you here because I'm going to keep saying it and you might as well know what it means. And the word is sesquiquadrate. Okay. Sesquiquadrate is a 135-degree angle between two planets. And it creates tension or inner conflict, but it can also spark growth and creative solutions. Think of it as a subtle push towards change. Okay, so he has quite a few sesquiquadrate aspects in his chart. So the first one is the sun sesquiquadrate Pluto. And this indicates internal friction between identity and depth, power and transformation. So again, that balance being sought, inner conflict, seeking external satisfaction, okay, of what he's conflicted by. He had Mars sesquiquadrate Pluto, creative energy colliding with a subterranean force. So again, that deep broodiness that seems to be a theme about the good brother, and hidden wounds informing action. So I said internal conflict seeking external healing or external satisfaction. So he would sing about the things that affected him and having others join in, even if there was heartbreak, even if it were social issues, he would bring those to the surface through his art and the recognition that he would receive, and other people gathering around a cause, even if it was, oh yeah, I had my heart broken too. That would offer healing for him as a person, and as an artist. Okay, so he enjoyed his work, not just because he was famous, not just because of the opportunities that it gave him, but it was actually part of his healing, producing music and sharing his pain. So the moon in his chart is also sesquiquadrate Mercury, which talks about an emotional life in tension with a verbal mind. Some truths were felt, but hard to fully articulate. So as prolific as he may have been with the 3 albums that we were able to experience, and I'm sure countless other, opportunities that he had to perform and share, there were still things that he wasn't quite able to put into words, struggles that he wasn't able to share, things that may have still been deeply affecting him that we will never know because he hadn't found the sounds to make, to share with us. So in his chart, we also have Venus semi-sextile North Node, which involves his relational life, and it holds a subtle tether to soul's mission. Okay. So his relationships would have been connected to whatever his soul's mission was. He would not have been in arbitrary relationships. He would not have just looked up and seen people around him. The relationships that he got involved with would be because somehow those people pushed him further to completing his soul's mission. They may have been a necessary part of him completing his soul's mission, but every relationship that he would be involved in, from the most important, like a life partner, to somebody that he watched the game with, those relationships would have been intentional. And he would have valued those relationships because they connected him to his purpose. And he could see that. He could understand that. This person brings me joy. This person makes me question the status quo. This person helps me to understand my trauma. These are thoughts that he would have had about each and every person that he spent time with. He would have been intentional. He had Mercury octile Venus. And what this means is that there's a minor but tense relationship between thought and love. So he would have felt love very strongly, and he would have understood it, so much so that he would not have put a lot of thought into it, if that makes sense. So just like he would have been intentional with those relationships and the people that he chose to spend time with, because he understood that it propelled him with regard to his purpose, he would have loved in a similar fashion, being very serious about what he felt and his feelings and choosing that over rational thought sometimes. So, using the full date of his birthday, we come up with a life path number of 7. And this number is connected to the investigator, the mystic, the solitary seeker. The number 7 also carries deep introspection. A person with this number may be one who goes on pilgrimages. This person may appear restless to others. And a person who has a number 7 life path number would almost always have a spiritual hunger. They will always be seeking spiritually. And it appears that these are all things that apply to his life. There are some thematic arcs that came up when I did this study of his astrology. And the first one being that his vision was tempered by beauty. With the sun in Aquarius, it demands prophecy. His moon in Libra demands alignment and relational grace. He was fated to mediate between the wild future and the intimate now. Okay, so he may have been a dreamer, but he would have been grounded in the now, but with some dreams. Okay. The sun in Pluto indicates that he had friction from birth, that his identity may not have ever been stable. He may have always been in flux, inventing and reinventing himself. He would repeatedly die and be reborn. I don't do that anymore. I don't wear that anymore. I don't sound like that anymore. I don't listen to that kind of music anymore. Like, he would consistently reinvent himself. The Mars and Pluto tension in his chart means that his creative drive would have been haunted by a hidden pain. And I talked about that earlier. He was deeply affected by many things, you guys. He felt things very deeply. He may have suppressed some of the things that he felt because he didn't want to be that person who brought down the mood. He didn't want to be that person who was always going through something, but he was that person. And he had a lot of inner tumult, okay? A lot of inner, that Libra energy, a lot of things that he went back and forth on, a lot of things where he changed his mind, he reinvented his philosophy with regard to things. So he did a little bit of suffering, a little bit of spiritual suffering inside. And I believe that a lot of this was unseen. People who knew him, some people in these key relationships that I mentioned earlier, that he would have intentionally formed, they may not have even always known about what they were experiencing from him. They would have known what they were experiencing from him, but they may not have known the reasoning behind it. They may not have known why they experienced him the way that they did, because a lot of what he experienced, he wasn't able to share. Because as I said earlier, he didn't have words to articulate what he understood. So the moon in Mercury indicates tensions that his emotional truths were deeper than words. His lyrics, his silences, his pauses carry the unsaid. Okay, so again, not always able to say what he was experiencing or understanding. The Venus node semi-sextile suggests that the way he loved, the circles that he loved in, and the aesthetic communities that he formed were all part of pushing him towards his destiny. His romance and aesthetic life were not tangents, but rather ladders. So he had a type, and that type may not have looked a certain way to us, but aesthetically for him, they looked a certain way. They looked like he would have been drawn to archetypes. He would have been drawn to characters in his story, and he would have been intentionally in relationship with those characters. And I'm not just talking about romantic relationships. He would have been intentionally in relationship with those characters until problems were solved, healing occurred, until he had made the deposits that he needed to energetically. But these relationships, the way that they looked to him, would have continued throughout his life. And they would have very much been connected to romance for him. Okay. Mercury, octile Venus, seeds complexity in how he thought and how he longed. Beauty and longing would sometimes be double-edged, shimmering, and cutting. So again, we're talking about him having a type, him being very much attracted to what he thought was beautiful. And you know that I'm right about his type being something that he understood, because how many times, if I'm being honest, Angie Stone, she's an ancestor too now, may she rest in perfect peace and power. But people were very quick to be like, that's his baby mama. She was older than him, right? She wasn't as glamorous as maybe some of the other women that we knew that he could probably get. But nevertheless, he loved Angie Stone. They had a relationship. They made a baby together. So there was some beauty that he was attracted to that maybe we couldn't see, that we didn't understand. And I guarantee you that whatever it was that he was attracted to in Angie Stone, he continued to be attracted to that same thing that for him was aesthetically pleasing. That same thing to him, it looked good, whatever it was. Okay. Let's talk about soul contracts and blueprints. He would have lived in tension, the tension between his public life and his private life, between prophecy and romance, and between body and spirit, silence and voice. You see all this? That's that Libra again, that Libra energy. Okay. There would have been tension always between this or that. This is part of his contract. This is part of how he came here, the work that he came here to do. Ritual and silence, withdrawal, retreats, long silences. This is how people would have experienced him. He would have withdrawn. Remember, I said at the beginning, he was very much affected. Okay. So this would cause him to withdraw. This would cause him to retreat. This would cause there to be long silences and breaks in communication, even though we know that relationships were important to him and that he was strategically maintaining these relationships because they were important to him. He still might have fallen out with people due to the fact that he would disappear. And when he did disappear, um, you could think of his silence as a kind of gestation. It would be because something was brewing, something was happening, something was coming about or about to be birthed. His soul demanded periodic descent in order to renew. So he had to go within and he would drop deeply into his body to figure out where he was, who he was, and what he wanted to do next. And once he was recalibrated, he would come up and he would reclaim space, which is why there was a lot of a lot of time between his albums. But each one, he became decidedly more sure of who he was and what he came to do and how he was going to do it. The friction aspects of his chart suggest that power arises through his suffering. Again, deeply affected. So, as he suffered and as he tried to make sense of things and as he tried to heal and fix himself, he would become more powerful because knowledge is power. So, the more he knew about who he was and how he was and where he was, the more powerful he would be on the other side. His creative flame would feed on his inner fractures, not, he was not reduced because of them. Okay. He was able to grow more as an artist because of the things that pained him, because of the fractures in his soul, basically. Love, collaboration, family, these would be fields of testing, of mirror work. His relational life would demand maturation, humility, and heartbreak. He was not here to output volumes. He was here to awaken listening souls. His mission was the long haul, to influence in silence and to plant seeds in the underground. He would cross many thresholds in his life. He would debut, he would retreat, he would return. He would grow ill and he would pass. His life would be packaged in transitions, initiations, and rupture. The scarcity of his output in his life matched the tension in his chart. He would create slowly, meticulously, and under pressure. Remember, his creativity was medicine for him. Yes, he got paid. Yes, he got opportunities. Of course, there was that part of it. But his creativity was medicine for him. He healed through his music, he healed through his creativity. He communed with God and spirit as he created. So his albums were not always about you and I listening to them, or the videos that he got to make, or the other artists that he got to collaborate. This was part of his soul's contract for him to create. He struggled, and I told y'all I would get back to this. He struggled with his body image, sexual myth, and expectations. And there was a friction between his identity and his public projection. So, while of course the admiration that it felt for him to be standing on the screen in How Does It Feel, being a sex symbol finer than any dude that any of us were dating at the time, let's keep it real, right? He looked good. He knew he looked good. The pressure to keep that image up, the inability to maintain that very strict form as he aged, all of those things became burdensome to him. And it was another thing that he was deeply affected by. And so he would retreat. He would retreat and he would go in the house and he would eat because he gained weight. We saw images of him here and there where he gained weight, where he was eating and probably not working out. And these are probably things that troubled him, okay? Things that caused him pain. Um, and again, that Libra tension, maybe eating instead of doing what we need to do to keep our body in the form that we need to in order to get the accolades that we are accustomed to, and it being a cycle. If I would only do that thing that I need to do to get the thing that I want, then I'd have what I want and all would be well. But sometimes it's not easy to do that as much as we logic it, right? And so he was a person who was affected by that. So he withdrew. And there were times where he wasn't seen and where he didn't come out and where he wasn't available. But again, we know from his chart that he would withdraw. And he did. Let's talk a little bit about part 3. The day of his death. Excuse me 1 second, y'all. I need to charge. Don't want to lose y'all. Y'all okay? Are y'all liking this reading? Give me some energy. Can I get a yellow heart, somebody? A yellow heart, a sunflower, something. Okay. So we're going to keep moving. I'm sorry, I got my computer on this. Okay. All right, there we go. Okay, so his passing. He passed on October 14th, 2025. And October is the 10th month, which has to do with the harvest. It has to do with the turning of the leaves and us preparing for the winter, dormancy, and transformation. The day of his passing, which is 14, can be broken down into 1 plus 5. I'm sorry, 1 plus 4, which equals 5. So he passed on the 14th day, which is 1 plus 4, which equals 5, which has to do with movement, rupture, mutation, transformation, and activity. So if we add all of these numbers together, 1 plus 0 plus 1, actually, if we add all of these numbers together, 10, the 10th month, 14th, the day he died, we get 24, which breaks down to 2 plus 4, which equals 6. Then we have legacy, service, relational responsibility, and caretaking. So you see all the energy surrounding those numbers. His death encodes rupture and legacy, a fracture that demands stewardship. It's a crossing moment. that gives birth to um, his posthumous field. Okay, so basically, we're saying that these numbers speak to the life and legacy that he left behind. The number five, the resonance of the number five means that his body could no longer carry um, the tension. It talks about how his soul had continuously broken. Remember, I talked about how he would reinvent himself. He would constantly die to himself and be reborn. So the number five speaks about this tension and the rupture that was continuously happening within himself. While the number six is anchored to legacy, harmony, often of a financial sort, the number six is connected to. Um, it's a charge to those who remain to live harmoniously, to interact in a way that is peaceful with what remains, and to carry on. His death is a transition from form into frequency, from mortal to the ancestral realm. His life was marked by thresholds and ruptures, and the long silence after voodoo is an example of that. The re-emergence with Black Messiah and periods of hidden pain in between. And ultimately, he crossed the threshold into the land of the ancestors. The rupture of form invites new listeners, reinterpretations, and new guardianship. His legacy is not static, it remains alive. So, what's predicted here with the numerology, the five and the six, is that there will be continued activity after his death. He's going to be rediscovered. I wouldn't be surprised if there was an uptick in album sales and people checking out his music. I actually heard someone today say that they weren't very familiar. It was a younger person. They were saying that they weren't very familiar with his music and that they were going to look it up. So the numerology of the day of his death indicates that there's going to be continued activity after his death that will result in harmony. That's the number six. So people are going to discover his music. They're going to start listening to his music more. They're going to start sharing his music. His music is probably going to be sampled and it's going to be included in new creations. It will influence creativity going forward, which again will bring about this harmony. So his music will live on, which is beautiful. So there are mandates that are kind of built into the numerology. His life arc number, the day of his death in particular, and I'm just going to go through a few of those. Archives, unreleased works, personal writings will become sacred after his death. It's important for his family and those caretakers of his estate to understand that these things are not simply commodities. There's a lot of spiritual tethers to his music. And so it's going to do them well, the people who are in charge of his catalogs, in charge of his music, to make sure that they're not just selling access to the highest bidder. They need to be very thoughtful about how his music is used going forward. And this is not on my report, but I am getting the download that I wouldn't be surprised if there are writings. If he has writings of some sort that we are not aware of or that haven't been published that may come out very shortly. I feel like he may have written during his illness as a way of coping and also trying to articulate things and put things down on paper. He probably also has, I feel, maybe film projects or something where he attempted to capture his process, whether it be the process of him writing songs or maybe recording his personal doctrine. I feel like we're going to hear about those kinds of things, that they will come out. Okay, so I did a composite chart, and that is where you put the birth date and the date of one's passing together in a hopes to draw more understanding. So I did that, and I'm just going to give you the highlights. So, highlights and interpretation. So we have a sun in Pisces as a composite here, which is mythic. It dissolves boundaries, and this signifies the dream portal. We have a moon in Scorpio, deep emotional alchemy, soul triggers, and a grief womb. Okay, so again, being very affected. Grief being the seed that leads to the birth of beautiful things. Mercury in Aquarius, transmissions through vision, resonance, and digital ethers. That's talking about his music living on after he has gone on, living in the ethers. And transmission through visions, I think, is talking about what I mentioned earlier about works that have yet to come to the light. Him attempting to transmit his ideas over across various forms. So not just music, perhaps film and writing. And okay. Venus in Sagittarius, sacred wanderer, cosmic love, mythic beauty. So these are themes of his life. Hopefully, y'all were picking up what I was putting down, but he definitely experienced cosmic love, the kinds of love that don't always make sense to other people. People might have looked at him and said, "What the hell are you doing? Who are you with? What are y'all doing? What is going on there?" And he knew in his soul what he was doing, and so he probably did not bother to explain a lot when it came to his choices. And the mythic beauty has to do with, again, that aesthetic that he was drawn to that other people may not have understood, but also him being this sex symbol, right? Him having this mythical beauty about him, a standard that he was troubled to maintain. Mars in Capricorn talks about discipline, long-term structure, and him being a legacy builder. So I pray that that means that he left his family comfortable, that he didn't leave a lot of debt or loose ends, and that his legacy will live on. Jupiter in Pisces talks about spiritual expansion, his work and efforts being blessed, and there being a mystical tone to his undertakings. Saturn in Gemini talks about karmic boundaries in speech, multiplicity, and contradictions. I apologize, y'all. I'm trying to look at my notes. Wow. I don't want to bog you down with so much. I literally have like 12 pages of notes that I pulled together. So um thank you. Okay. So I am going to pretty much wrap it up from here because I feel like some of the other things that I have in this report just kind of cycle through or repeat the themes of his life and passing. Um, from what I'm able to recreate, it appears that D'Angelo was a person who felt things very deeply, that this led him to be very creative because he was talented and those were the gifts that God gave him. But in being creative, he also self medicated. He learned to heal himself through music. And we know that his earliest conversations with God happened through music. They said at the age of 3 years old. So he healed himself through music. He discovered himself through music. And he was able to heal other people and to create fellowship across distances of time, space, genre, and eras with his music. So we give thanks and we give praise and we honor the musician D'Angelo today. Um, he is our newest ancestor, and we are grateful to have been able to experience his contributions to the world by way of his music. And remember, we are probably going to hear um, more from D'Angelo now that he is an ancestor. There are probably volumes of work that will be released, music, writings, and I believe even film. So when that comes out, remember I told you, I am Priestess Oshunfunke. Thank you for joining me tonight.
Nobody talks about you, then you want